Witbank Prison, located in Mpumalanga, South Africa, has long been shrouded in mystery and fear. Built in the early 1900s, the prison has a dark history of violence and death. Whispers of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena have circulated among the inmates and guards, earning it a reputation as one of the most haunted places in the region. Detective Sarah Thompson, a seasoned investigator with a knack for solving unusual cases, was called in to look into a series of disturbing incidents at the prison. Several inmates had reported terrifying encounters with an unseen entity, and 2 guards had mysteriously vanished without a trace. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah set off for Witbank Prison. As she approached the imposing structure, Sarah felt a sense of foreboding. The air was thick with tension, and the high walls loomed over her like a menacing sentinel. She took a deep breath and stepped through the heavy iron gates, ready to face whatever awaited her. Inside, the prison was a maze of narrow hallways and claustrophobic cells. The dim lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the distant echoes of inmates' voices created an unsettling atmosphere. Warden Jacobs greeted Sarah with a grim expression. "Thank you for coming, Detective Thompson," he said. "We need your help. Something is terribly wrong here." Sarah began her investigation by speaking with the inmates who had reported encounters with the entity. Many of them were hardened criminals, but the fear in their eyes was genuine. "It was like nothing I've ever seen," said one inmate, his voice trembling. "A dark figure, almost human but not quite. It whispered things, terrible things, and then it vanished." Another inmate recounted a similar experience. "It felt like something was inside me, trying to take over. I couldn't control my own thoughts." Determined to find answers, Sarah decided to spend the night in one of the cells where the encounters had occurred. As the hours passed, the prison grew quieter, and the oppressive atmosphere became almost suffocating. Just as she began to think the night would be uneventful, she heard a faint whisper. "Leave." The word sent chills down Sarah's spine. She turned, her flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Moments later, the temperature in the cell dropped suddenly, and she felt a presence behind her. Sarah's breath became visible in the frigid air, and she knew she was not alone. Determined to understand the entity she was dealing with, Sarah delved into the prison's history. She combed through old records and spoke with retired guards and former inmates. The more she learned, the more she realized that Witbank Prison was built on a foundation of suffering and despair. In the early days, the prison had been notorious for its brutal treatment of inmates. One name kept resurfacing in her research: Marcus Blackwood, a sadistic warden who had ruled the prison with an iron fist. Blackwood had been known for his ruthless punishments and had been rumored to dabble in dark rituals. Sarah's investigation led her to an old, abandoned building on the prison grounds. Inside, she found a hidden chamber filled with occult symbols and ritualistic artifacts. Among them was a diary belonging to Blackwood. The entries detailed his obsession with gaining power through dark means and his belief that he could summon and control malevolent entities. As Sarah read the chilling entries, she felt a growing sense of dread. It was clear that Blackwood had succeeded in summoning something, but instead of controlling it, he had unleashed a malevolent force that now haunted the prison. With a better understanding of the entity, Sarah knew she had to find a way to confront and banish it. She sought the help of Father Michael, a priest known for his work in exorcisms and dealing with the supernatural. Father Michael agreed to assist her, and together they returned to Witbank Prison. They set up in the old chapel, a place that had long been abandoned and forgotten. Sarah felt the oppressive atmosphere intensify as they prepared for the exorcism. As they began the ritual, the temperature in the chapel plummeted, and the air grew thick with malevolent energy. Suddenly, one of the inmates convulsed and collapsed to the floor, his eyes rolling back in his head. The entity had found a new host. Father Michael continued the exorcism, his voice steady and unwavering. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this place." The inmate's body contorted as the entity fought to maintain its grip. Sarah watched in horror as the inmate's face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage and pain. The room shook, and the candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Finally, with a final cry, the entity was expelled from the inmate's body. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The inmate lay on the floor, exhausted but free from the malevolent presence. Despite the successful exorcism, Sarah knew that the entity had not been fully banished. It still lingered within the prison, waiting for another opportunity to strike. She and Father Michael decided to confront the entity head-on, returning to the hidden chamber where Blackwood had conducted his rituals. As they entered the chamber, the air grew thick with tension, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Sarah felt a sense of foreboding as they approached the altar where Blackwood had performed his dark rites. Father Michael began to recite prayers, his voice echoing through the chamber. The temperature dropped, and the room filled with a malevolent energy. Sarah could feel the entity's presence, watching them from the shadows. Suddenly, the candles were extinguished, plunging the room into darkness. A cold breeze swept through the chamber, and the entity manifested before them, a dark, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. "You do not belong here," Father Michael said, his voice unwavering. "Return to the darkness from whence you came." The entity hissed, its form twisting and writhing. Sarah felt a surge of fear but steeled herself, focusing on Father Michael's voice. The room shook, and the walls seemed to close in around them. With a final, deafening roar, the entity was banished, its form dissolving into the darkness. The room returned to its normal state, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. With the entity banished, Witbank Prison slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The inmates and guards no longer felt the oppressive presence that had haunted them, and the mysterious disappearances ceased. Sarah documented her findings and presented them to the authorities. While many were skeptical of her claims, those who had experienced the entity's malevolence were grateful for her efforts. Father Michael returned to his parish, his faith strengthened by the experience. He continued his work in exorcisms, knowing that there were still many battles to be fought against the forces of darkness. With the entity banished, Witbank Prison slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The inmates and guards no longer felt the oppressive presence that had haunted them, and the mysterious disappearances ceased. Yet, for Detective Sarah Thompson, the case was far from over. The entity may have been expelled, but its lingering effects were still palpable. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still amiss. The darkness that had plagued the prison seemed to hang in the air like a fog, refusing to dissipate completely. She continued to visit the prison regularly, keeping a watchful eye for any signs of residual paranormal activity. One stormy evening, as Sarah stood outside the prison, watching the lightning dance across the sky, she felt a familiar chill run down her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and an eerie silence enveloped her. It was a feeling she had come to recognize all too well, the presence of something otherworldly. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah ventured back into the prison. The hallways were deserted, and the only sound was the distant rumble of thunder. As she walked through the dimly lit corridors, her flashlight casting long shadows on the walls, she couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. She made her way to the old chapel, where the exorcism had taken place. The room was dark and cold, the air thick with an oppressive energy. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached the altar, where the ritual had been performed. She felt a sudden gust of wind, and the candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the room was filled with a bone-chilling scream. Sarah spun around, her flashlight illuminating the terrified face of an inmate. He was huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. "It's back," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The entity, it never left." Sarah's blood ran cold. How could this be? The exorcism had been successful, hadn't it? She knew she had to act quickly before the entity could claim another victim. Determined to put an end to the entity's reign of terror once and for all, Sarah sought out Father Michael. The priest had been instrumental in the initial exorcism, and she hoped he could shed some light on the situation. Father Michael listened intently as Sarah recounted the events of the previous night. His expression grew grave, and he crossed himself as he spoke. "It is possible that the entity was not fully banished," he said. "Sometimes these malevolent forces can cling to a place, even after an exorcism. We must return to the prison and perform a final ritual to cleanse it completely." With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah and Father Michael returned to Witbank Prison. They made their way to the old chapel, where the air was thick with an oppressive energy. The room seemed to pulse with malevolent power, and Sarah could feel the entity's presence all around her. Father Michael began to recite prayers, his voice steady and unwavering. Sarah watched as he sprinkled holy water around the room, creating a protective barrier. The temperature dropped, and the candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening roar. The walls shook, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Sarah felt a surge of fear, but she steeled herself, focusing on Father Michael's voice. The entity manifested before them, a dark, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. It hissed, its form twisting and writhing as it fought against the holy power. "You have no power here," Father Michael said, his voice unwavering. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this place." The entity roared in defiance, its form growing more unstable. Sarah could feel the malevolent energy intensifying, threatening to overwhelm them. But Father Michael continued to pray, his faith a beacon of light in the darkness. With a final, deafening scream, the entity was banished. The room returned to its normal state, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Sarah and Father Michael stood in silence, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. With the entity finally banished, Witbank Prison began to heal. The inmates and guards no longer felt the oppressive presence that had haunted them, and the mysterious disappearances ceased. The prison returned to its normal routine, and the darkness that had plagued it slowly dissipated. Sarah documented her findings and presented them to the authorities. While many were skeptical of her claims, those who had experienced the entity's malevolence were grateful for her efforts. Father Michael returned to his parish, his faith strengthened by the experience. He continued his work in exorcisms, knowing that there were still many battles to be fought against the forces of darkness. Despite the successful banishment of the entity, Sarah remained vigilant. She knew that the forces of darkness could return at any time, and she was determined to be ready. She continued to visit Witbank Prison regularly, ensuring that the malevolent presence was truly gone. One evening, as Sarah stood outside the prison, watching the sunset, she felt a sense of peace. The darkness had lifted, and the spirits of those who had suffered within its walls could finally find rest. The legacy of Witbank Prison served as a powerful reminder of the importance of seeking the truth and confronting the darkness. The prison, once a place of fear and suffering, had become a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of the human spirit. And so, the story of Possessed by Evil, the entity in Witbank Prison, lived on, a tale of mystery, redemption, and the unwavering determination of a detective who had dared to confront the shadows of the past and bring light to the darkest corners of history. As Sarah walked away from the prison for the last time, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were still many battles to be fought, many mysteries to be unraveled. But she was ready, armed with her faith and her determination, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. If you were captivated by the suspenseful and chilling tale of Possessed by Evil, the entity in Witbank Prison, and want more spine-tingling stories and thrilling content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories that grip your imagination and keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community.